Morning, folks. Thanks for joining us. If you thought you were coming for the Zero Trust session, you're in the wrong place. This is the Digital Trust session. We'll talk a little bit about what digital trust is as part of this. So why digital trust is imperative for business growth. I've got a couple of three panelists here with me today, so I'll just ask them to introduce themselves. So maybe Simon, do you want to start?
Yes, certainly. Hello, everybody. My name is Simon Schofield. I am the head of security at Atradius. Most of you will not know who that is. We're a business-to-business credit insurer, so we insure the supply chain. I've got a varied background in cybersecurity. I was head of cybersecurity for BAE Systems for 9 years, so protecting submarines, aircraft carriers and things like that. Also director of security for Rackspace, so managing the cloud, and now head of security at Atradius.
Thank you. And Dan?
Morning, everyone. My name's Dan Overton. I'm the EMEA Information Security Officer and UK Data Protection Officer for Lockheed Martin. So we'll probably know who we are, but we're a large defence company, make a lot of things that go zoom and boom. Work in sort of the governance risk compliance space, come from sort of quite a technical background with network security and architecture, so sort of see both sides of the coin, really.
Awesome. And Sarah?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Sarah Lawson. I am currently the Deputy CIO and CISO for UCL, University College London. So I argue with myself about digital trust, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. We have about 75,000 students, 75,000 people, including students and academics. And we have a huge eclectic mix of technology. And again, talk to you about that in a minute and how that imposes on digital trust.
Thank you. So I guess when we got this topic, we were thinking about it, and I kind of intrinsically, values and ethics have always been foundations for successful businesses, but maybe we don't always think about that all the time. But modern digital businesses that want to be perceived as reliable and trustworthy need to recognize the importance of having a cybersecurity strategy, and that makes sense as well. So in order to create relationships with customers that are long-lasting, built on trust, businesses need to establish a technology landscape that can enforce security and identity without introducing friction, which isn't that easy. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So we're here to talk about digital trust, but if we start off with, how do we define the term digital trust? And what does it look like in our own organizations? And we've got quite a wide variety of organizations here. So interested to hear what you guys think about what the definition of digital trust is. So maybe Dan, do you want to have a crack at that?
Yeah, sure. So digital trust, I think people are paying a lot more attention to it nowadays, right? You want to know where your data's going when you sign up for any service, be it online, even in shops, they're asking for email addresses for receipts. So really, what is that company doing with your information? How are they protecting it? You've got security, you've got the privacy, you've got the transparency, accountability, ethics, all those pieces sort of come together to form digital trust. And I think businesses nowadays, their reputation relies heavily on digital trust, and people care a lot more. So really, it's now become a business enabler because people are choosing to where they use their business, where they spend their money purely on, is this company gonna look after my data if I give it to them? Which maybe like 5-10 years ago you didn't have. There were other considerations, whereas nowadays, it's high on people's agenda. So really, all those aspects of, if I give my personal information to you, what are you going to do with it, and can I trust you?
Very good. Sarah?
Yeah, my thoughts were, first of all, I was slightly embarrassed when I was asked to come on this panel because I thought, have I missed a buzzword? Is digital trust a big thing that I should know about? So I looked it up. And it is really the definition that Dan's given around the expectation of trust. And I started thinking about, well, that's been my job for the last 20 years. And what's really interesting for me is that I think we assume people want digital trust, and a lot of people are very interested in, where is my data going, what is happening to it. But a lot of people are not. And that's the bit that makes our jobs hard, because actually when I'm talking to technologists, when I'm talking to IT teams, when I'm talking to people about, well, we're looking after people's data, and they're like, yeah, but actually we don't need that because it's expensive. Okay, let's move on. And even our vendors, and sorry for vendors in the audience, but even our vendors still bolt on our security or trust bits as an extra bit to pay for. Would you like data loss prevention in this particular thing that we're buying? Would you like to buy something? And until we've got that right, we're not really in a position to gain the trust of those that are giving us the data. I think we're still lacking, and many of our systems are lacking, and people shouldn't be trusting most organisations. That's just my thought. That's what I was thinking about as I was wondering whether I'd missed a boat on what that was. But I actually do think the word digital trust is a really good one, and I'm going to think about how I can use it.
Yeah, sure. So working for an insurance company, digital trust is incredibly important to our customers. They want to make sure that the data they're giving is correct, because obviously we make underwriting decisions on that. So we get a lot more questions from customers to the security department, which has increased tenfold in the last couple of years, of our customers trying to gain digital trust in my company, Tradius. So to me, it's all about, do we do the right thing, what I call cyber hygiene? Are we managing the risk of cyber, and how do we communicate that to our customers, that the systems that they are sharing their data is accurate and gives the right results and protects from the risk of a cyber attack.
Very good. So just if anybody's got a question, anybody's got anything to add, just catch my attention and let's make this interactive if you like. So absolutely up to you. Dan, I noticed that you've got a DPO in your title, so I'm going to start with you on this next one, if that's okay. So with data protection legislation becoming more relevant and appreciating that a proactive cybersecurity program can play a crucial role in fostering digital trust, what challenges are we facing here?
Yeah, so the obvious first one's like obviously regulations. GDPR was 5 years ago now, which is making me feel a bit old. But yeah, so keeping up to date with all that side is always a challenge. What Simon just mentioned about having that security posture, and then the proactive versus reactive. One of the challenges people want to know, is your data like going to be safe, but are you looking after it before there's a problem, as opposed to reactively trying to fix this massive issue that they've caused. So they're two of the challenges. Another aspect you've got is the generational thing, I think. So Gen Zs especially, and then I don't even know what the next generation coming up are called, but they care a lot more about their data than the older generations. So I think you're going to see more and more of sort of people caring, as they enter the workplace, as they get bank cards, start their online presence. I think you're really going to see a big sort of shift in that sort of thing. And then another challenge as well, it wouldn't be a panel conversation without mentioning AI, but AI has exploded on the scene, as everyone knows, this last couple of months, and people care, are they using AI responsibly? If I give the company my data, is that all linked together as well? It's sort of just another aspect that's just really come on the scene now.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Simon, any thoughts to add on that?
So the challenges I see with any strategy is that of resources. Do I have the right resources to deliver the requirements of the board to manage risk? And what I mean by that is, do we have the right capacity and capability within our teams? As Dan there mentioned, AI is on the scene. Well, that's a whole new technology. Who understands from a security perspective around AI and how to protect against it? So these are increasing threats, constantly requiring teams to protect and manage that risk, and that's a huge problem. The other one is regulators. If you're a global company like I am, I'm in 50 countries. That's 50 regulators all on the bandwagon about cybersecurity, and they all have a different way of enforcing their policy upon a global company like that. So how do we deconflict when one regulator says do it this way and the other regulator wants it a different way? So again, that's another area we have to manage to maintain that trust with our regulator, because our licensing to operate in that country hinges on our ability to have digital trust from the regulator. So that's a key point from me.
Interesting. Digital trust from the regulator. I like that. And Sarah?
Yeah, I've worked in lots of organisations, and I'm now back in the higher education sector, and I think there's a couple of things. I think if we talk about the AI, I think what is really interesting, and I think we're going to talk about ethics in a little bit, but what is interesting to me is we've been using in security AI to monitor behavioural patterns, and they're getting much, much better. And if you think about the behavioural patterns that we're now able to identify of the individuals in our organisations, they're pretty strong. And I'm not sure from a data protection point of view whether we've really thought about that in terms of regulation. And I suspect over the next few years, it's all going to start clicking into place that companies have been managing a lot of behavioural information about their employees, their customers and everything in a way that people haven't thought about before. I think they're starting to think about it. ChatGPT has become the big thing. And we're now hearing people at bus stops talking about AI, even though we've all know in this room that it's been going for a long time. So I think that interest is going to change that regulation and how much scrutiny businesses will have. And I know in the education sector, everybody's completely panicking of how are we going to tell whether their dissertations have been written by AI or them? How are we going to know whether the lecturers have written the notes themselves or written it through ChatGPT? How are we, there's a whole load of questions that we're now thinking about in terms of, and that's all about data. And I think the other thing about kind of data protection and regulation is, none of this is new. None of this is something that we've, it's not a sudden thing. But keeping those nudges with the individuals in our organisation around, it's data you're moving around in your digital estate. It is data that is the important thing in your digital estate. It isn't anything else that's important. It is the data. We're literally moving data about or storing it or holding it and trying to bring them back to the very simplistic view of that's what we're doing. That's the value. The ransomware is not about anything else. It's about grabbing the data. The incidents and threats we have is about grabbing the data and trying to bring people back to that rather than getting them in a pickle around, what do I buy? What do I have? Where do I put it? What machine do I put it on? What do I do this? That doesn't matter. Let's do the risk assessment around the data we're holding. And that's one of the things we try to do in higher education. We have to, because we have every piece of technology known to man. So it's all about the data.
Very good. So we've got a stewardship function, I think, around that data, and sometimes just within an organization, I think there's a stewardship function. The business owns the data, IT processes the data. So I think there's a number of different bits to that. I think the other thing that what we haven't talked about within this kind of data protection side is, and you talked about behavioral analytics, is the Workers' Council. So anybody who's ever worked in a European company, it's really difficult to put in some of that behavioral software because they're really hot on that. So it's something that I think also plays into that. Building that trust with that group of individuals is something that's going to be really important. So moving on, unless there's any questions or anybody's got anything that they want to add to that, don't wave your arms around because you'll get asked to participate. Yes.
Just a question for Simon. As you said about the dealing with different regulations and regulators in different countries. As we all know, data is so fluid and it moves around before you know, and it's largely speed. So how do you actually manage the digital trust in the data and the confidence when it's moved from one domain or one side or one country to another?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the way we do it is we try not to move it. It's probably back to the challenge is our data centers are static, so we have one system that is global. So we bring them to us, and then we manage that data in a single location. And to actually move that data is quite difficult for us. And this again becomes the challenge where we try, when IT wants to move to the cloud, because it's the next big thing, and everybody says cloud is it, but the board say no, our data is not to move. When in other companies, when I was in Rackspace, it is a huge problem that needs to be maintained of knowing where that data goes, especially when it's in the cloud, because as you know, as soon as it goes into the cloud, we actually lose control of it, really. We trust our cloud provider that when they say that the data is stored within Europe, it's in Europe. But actually, is it? So especially if you start talking about content delivery networks and things like that, it could be anywhere. And it's a big struggle. So I don't think there is a stock answer. It's understanding your data processes, and I suppose I'm going to say it's the digital trust in our users, the data owners. It's making sure that the people who own the data for the business know where that data is. They understand the processing, they understand why that needs to be processed in a certain way, and they need to come to us or to my assurance group and say, we want to do this. And instead of trying to hide it from security needs to become the advisors rather than the auditor. And we need to work with the business to find out why they need to move the data from A to B. Is there a different way of doing that? Or if we move it, again, making sure we understand the regulatory and the compliance requirements to move that data, and that we have a legal preference to do so. So it is incredibly difficult, but again, you have to trust your data owners to be responsible for their data, and that is a challenge. And it's taken a couple of years, but we're starting to work with the board to get the country managers to say, you are responsible for data. You have to have that trust with the business. You need to make sure you're processing correctly and that you know where that data is. I hope that kind of answers your question.
Okay, it's just once the data owners and the company managers on the end here have no idea what the digital security can be, and so it's kind of very hard to explain it to them when comes to do something like this.
Yeah. So very important for strategy is having a good user awareness strategy. That's not just for the users at the bottom of the company, but for the management board, the directors, that you have a positive relationship with them where you're giving them awareness and advice, not dictating them with slides and things, but actually help them understand that they are accountable and need to take responsibility. It is difficult, but if you persevere at the senior level with politics, then they start to get it. And as long as, again, you don't act as the auditor, as the chief of information security, you're not saying thou shalt. You're saying how do you need to do your business? How can I help? You can start building that relationship, but it takes years, not months.
Interesting. Another question?
So you mentioned Workers' Council. I work in a German company, so very familiar with them. But all they're really doing is representing the voice of your employees. So when we talk about business growth and digital trust, how do you replicate that independent function for governance, for checking what you're doing is ethically right in a business setting?
Yeah, great question. Does anybody want to pick that up?
I think the ethics of what we're doing is really important, and I get challenged a lot because I have a lot of academics that question what I do in terms of they're researching it, they're researching ethics. And so when we've done a large scale prevention campaign in our email, because that's one of our biggest attack vectors, and we do a lot of behavioral analytics to not what we're looking at, but we do a lot of analytics to assume what an individual is right for an individual so that we can protect them. So, and I think, again, it comes down to that understanding of what trust is, and trying to make sure that we are working with the individuals, through a governance structure. And we have a governance structure. We have a way of discussing this with those in the business to say, look, this is what we're aiming to do. But if you challenge us, if that aim does not look right, then we need to think about it. And I think it's a tricky balance, because you will always have somebody that feels very strongly that that's gone beyond the pale. But actually, a lot of it in when we move into an AI world, and again, it's digital trust. We are allowing machines to do the thinking, to do the learning, and to do the automation with no human being interactive within that. And that is what we're doing in our email setting. So therefore, we are trusting the digital part, and we've managed to sort of convince people that really, that's safe, because there's no one individual person. They're worried about a person knowing about their behaviour. They're not worried about a machine knowing about their behaviour. So that's where ethically we've kind of worked that through. But I think in each time we think about this, we've got to be really careful. I've done a piece of work recently where we were thinking about, well, how far do you go on something? We've done a lot of medical device ethical on AI. What if all of a sudden your health app on your phone told you needed to go to hospital today, and I've also told your family that you're going to hospital today. I've also told your employee that you're going to hospital today. I've picked your kids up from school because you're not going to be able to get there because you're all really, really sick. In one way, that's great. But in another way, that's really that's a creepy line. That's gone too far. So there's that creepy line thing that we've got to really think about. So I think there's a huge amount of work we've got to do to gain the trust, digital trust, as we go forward. But it's not a single answer, but it fascinates me. I think it's brilliant. I think we've got a lot to. It's going to keep us in a job forever. It's great, isn't it?
It's a very good question to go with workers' councils. Obviously we work with workers' councils a lot, and it can be positive working with workers' councils. And I think it's building a relationship with your workers' council and explaining to them the risk to the business, the risk to the data, and how we want to manage that risk, and involve them at the earlier stages. We don't come along saying, oh, we've just implemented insider monitoring, or we've just implementing data loss protection. We're talking to the workers' council at the very beginning of the strategies. And I found when we do that, it's a lot easier to get through the workers, because they ask the questions, ethics. What are you monitoring? Why? How are you protecting our workers' identity there, and their rights and their privacy? And as long as whoever's supplying the solution understands that, so through your requirement gathering, and then you go to actually implementation, that they start feeding the requirements. And if they see that you're listening and that their requirements are being met, it's a lot easier to get these strategies through. So even now, again, to build that trust, I invest somebody on my team who's actually on the Workers' Council now. So they're a member. And they get to know the different people's requirements again. And because we're involved, and the security seems to be involved, we have a much better relationship, which I think we're going to discuss later. But that's how we manage it.
Awesome. Thank you. So that's great, because it's actually got us into the next question, which what are the ethical considerations to factor when fostering a culture of digital trust? So we've heard a little bit about that from Sarah, but maybe Dan, do you want to give us your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I think what you both just said is spot on with the worker council piece. You really see. Everyone thinks about security awareness training and getting that security culture built in the company, but a lot of people don't think about data protection training quite as important, I suppose. And I'm not talking about, like just someone doing a 30-minute PowerPoint presentation once a year just to tick a box, but actually making the teams that deal with the data, like HR, payroll, finance, really understand what they're expected to be doing with the data and how to protect it and really building that culture. And then just to touch on another point a moment ago, at Lockheed we've got sort of a thing called like privacy by design. So you mentioned you are like advisory to the board, also to the business on when they have requirements, and we're trying to build that into everything that's made or designed at Lockheed. It thinks about privacy from the start, not as an afterthought. Which obviously helps a lot with building that culture.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about all those people that consume data, use data, have data, but don't really perhaps realize that they do, and that awareness is quite a big thing. So just moving on then, and we can carry on with any of the ethical considerations, because I think they go through all of these. How do we ensure that we're creating and maintaining long-lasting, trustworthy relationships with our customers? So we've had quite a lot of conversation about internal, but what about our customers? And I also think about, what about our third parties? So I think you mentioned there's data in the cloud, Simon, and that's a third-party relationship that we have. There's a contract there. How do we enforce that across that barrier? So that trustworthy relationships with customers in an environment where you've also got suppliers.
So let's discuss the cloud. The biggest problem when because I've been on both ends of the cloud relationship. So I've been on the receiving end as a customer, and on the delivery end when I work for Rackspace. The key is having this shared security model, is understanding what the customer is accountable for and what I am accountable for as the supplier. And again, it's getting into that early relationship with the customer and the designs when they're on the cloud, that they fully understand that when they get a service, be it infrastructure as service or platform as service, they are still responsible for their data. And what we provide, and that unless they pay for it, we don't monitor it. They don't get security by default, which could be wrong. But as people say, security costs money, and we live in the race to the bottom. But what we do is make it clear that when we are the third party, or when I'm talking to a third party, I fully understand as on the supply side who is going to deliver what, and is there a gap? If you don't have that conversation, very quickly you find out, I think they're doing it and they think I'm doing it. No one's doing it. And we don't find out till there's an audit or a regulator, and it becomes some really, really difficult. So the key areas for me around this is we have to be open with each other. So we have to be open with our suppliers, we have to be open with our customers at all times. We have to be accountable. If it goes wrong, it's no good pointing the finger. We have to own up to what our misunderstanding was, or because this again builds trust. If you're accountable and you can say to your customer or your supplier or whoever, yes, it went wrong, but this is how we've learnt. This is how we are going to make it not happen again. You start to build that trust because you are responsible for what you're doing. And we have to be initiative. Is that a word? Yes, just about. A bit too many red wines yesterday. We have to, again, as I said, AI is the next thing. What are the next things? We need to be aware. We need to, again, when you're talking to your customers, and they, as I said, they are very much more interested in where is the company going with its cybersecurity strategy? What are you investing in? What's the new thing? I've heard this is the new, I hate the word cyber buzzwords, and everybody uses them. We move from data loss protection to AI to the next big thing. I always like it when you go to these events and everybody is giving you the new thing. But is it right for the business? Is it right for your customers?
Interesting. And Sarah, you've got an interesting set of customers, I would have thought. So how are you going about maintaining that long-lasting, trustworthy relationship with them?
Yeah, and again, I think I agree with most of what Simon says. It's about the accountability piece, and what we're trying to do is get accountability across everywhere we go. So we have many customers, both internal and external, mostly highly regulated customers. So in our research area, we have governments, we have secret people we don't even know about. We have lots of research into medical health, etc. So there's a whole load of regulation there. In there, they actually don't trust us at all. And I think what's really interesting in the university sector, it's kind of grown up that there's an area in research where we have very, very specific, very controlled data handling, IT handling, on the basis that they don't trust that universities will be safe. And I think that's quite fascinating. So we've got this kind of little section of super, we call it trusted research environment, we call it data safe haven, whatever you want to call it, it's there because there's a kind of an implied view that the rest of the university is going to just mess up your data, but that bit at least is safe. And I wonder in our own businesses, and I've worked in lots of businesses, whether it kind of annoys me that there's this assumption that that part isn't that safe, and we don't care about that bit of data, but we do care about that bit. That's one of my bugbears. And I think, I don't know where I was going with that, but I think the idea is that we should be thinking about how our customers view us. What is the perception of each of our companies? We've recently had a Capita, large breach with Capita. That is data, that's pension data that was stolen. I didn't even know Capita were holding. This is the kind of third party risk. I had no idea that the university was passing it to someone else, who was passing it to someone else, who was then holding it in Capita. How much of our data is everywhere and anywhere? How much do we really understand? So we've got to trust that whole ecosystem. And I think one of the things that our customers don't know, and we're not very explicit about, is what our ecosystem is. Our ecosystem in a university is huge. We share data everywhere and anywhere. We try to do it in a controlled way. Our businesses are huge. We have a huge ecosystem, and we're not very explicit about that. And I think as we gain trust, we're going to have to be more overt, and perhaps our regulators will make us be more overt about who we're sharing our data with, because I don't think we do that very well at all. And I'd be interested if other people think that they are doing it well, because I don't think I've met many companies that are.
I like that term ecosystem, and thinking about things in an ecosystem, because I think it really does go across. Dan, your ecosystem is a little bit different to a university ecosystem, but how do you see this relationship with customers and building that trust?
Yes, obviously we don't have everyday customers similar to you, so it's more like the contracts, subcontracts, and supply chain sort of thing that we're focused on. But it's all the same thing, and transparency is absolutely key. So I think that's the one thing to take away today to build trust. Right, you need to say what you're doing and do what you say. If you do get breached, you touch on it. Own up immediately. Don't try and hide it. Don't try and bury it, get around it, blame someone else. Just own it up, and people will appreciate the honesty that you messed up, but if you're doing X, Y, Z to fix the problems. I think recently, can't think it was in America, somebody got breached, but effectively they paid for all the credit monitoring for all the customers for 3 or 4 years, because they were now at higher risk of fraud. So taking that extra sort of step to apologize in a way, and show that it's not going to happen again, will actually probably build trust in the long run, because other people will look at the company and go, well, they messed up, but they've learned their lesson. So now my data's probably safer with them than it was with this company that's never been breached. Yeah,
that's interesting.
I guess.
Yeah.
Another key area that I've noticed is I don't know if anybody in the audience, is the new cyber rating services used for supply chain management. And for self-assessment. These guys are looking at our companies continuously, and our customers are now using these rating services over and above the usual. Do you have ISO 27001 or do you NIST or PCI? They're going, your cyber rating is X. The cyber rating company has found the following. What are you going to do about it? So again, we've turned that into a positive, is we get on front, so we monitor the cyber rating services and we're looking for what they're finding, and then we fix it. We prioritise that fixing because it affects our brand, and as heads of information security, CISOs, we're all about assisting the brand management of the company to build that trust with our customer base. So my advice, if you're not doing it, is have a look at these branding services, but self-assess, because that's where you're getting a score from, and that builds trust with our users and customers.
Yeah, it's interesting how visible that score is to everybody out there, isn't it? All right, great. We've got about 5 minutes left, I think, folks. So if there's any questions from the floor before we, please.
Nick Aldrich here, up in West. I think something that Simon, you said, we often think about this as a technical problem, but the articulation and the clarity within your risk appetite, and then articulating that with your customers, certainly in banking, is really key. So we're talking business growth, I think, again, as well. How good / bad do you feel you are at absolutely nailing your risk appetite for digital risk for
Risk appetite, one of my favourite questions. Thank you very much.
My background is risk.
Yes.
I just don't think people are particularly good at determining risk appetite.
Well, I call it early hospital management. But if I talk to my CEO, his risk type is ridiculously. I cannot accept a breach of any kind. I want it 100% secure. Take the business offline if you need to. You go to your IT director and go, well, this is what the CEO says. They go, it's not going to work like that, Simon, is it? My appetite is completely different to the CEO's, and it's our job to monitor and manage that relationship between the two and come up with something sensible. But again, and that's again where you build the trust. This is internal trust with your IT providers and your IT directors and your CTOs. Is you come to it, but you have to be open and go back to the board and say, this is what really has happened. This is what our risk appetite is. This is what we will accept. This is what we won't accept. This is where it's in the middle, and here's the process. Because it's very difficult when you've got a risk appetite and something goes over that risk appetite. What do you do? I'm going to go back to what these guys says, and being open and understand the problems and work as a team. Don't be the auditor. Be the guy that understands the problems your IT team have with patching and all these other things that we expect of things. But, as I said, it moves too quickly. And applications don't like it when you patch because they fall over. Well, if it falls over, you're not doing business. But your board doesn't understand that. So you have to find ways to talk to your board so they understand the real risk they're facing and what they need to accept, because it's just not viable to mend something or replace something or adopt something. It has to go through a process. So it's a very difficult question, and I don't think I've ever found anybody who can give me an answer, really.
It's interesting because, you think about reputational risk, but do you ever think about digital trust when you talk about risk? And perhaps it's one of the things that should be in there, because I don't think we think about it like that. So that's fascinating. Any other questions from the floor the last couple of minutes? Otherwise we can do, yeah.
Thanks, guys. Ed Hatherley from National Grid. So, we talked about data protection and privacy and digital trust, and I think they're all quite discrete. Certainly from a security perspective, when everyone said, oh my God, privacy is now in the boardroom, GDPR was in flight, and we turned around and said, well, we do that. We're on top of privacy because we've got data protection locked down. And they went, no, this is different because there's new data, it's personal data, sensitive personal data. That's the stuff that we need to be focused on finding, protecting, showing how we're processing it, etc. Digital trust, I think, is then a kind of further build on that, where somehow there has to be a measure of how are we gaining the trust of our customers internally and externally. So my question is, in terms of that, data protection to privacy to now digital trust, how as organisations do you measure internally and externally that you've achieved it or that you're moving in the right direction towards obtaining it?
Any thoughts, folks?
Outside of, actually just to build on that, outside of the cop-out, which is, we're compliant. So how are you gathering evidence to demonstrate that your customers are?
Yeah, I don't really know the answer to that, but
Like I say, it's iterations, right? Of digital trust is now the next step of it, and I wonder in the next few years whether we'll have like people who actually their job roles are digital trust. Rather than being a DPO, you're responsible for the wider reputational piece, sort of. I guess it would like be a bit of a hybrid, like a technical marketing data protection sort of role, trying to sell it. I don't know the answer to your question now. I mean, that's a challenge, but I wonder if that's the direction we're sort of moving towards, almost.
I was just thinking about that. I don't know the answer, but in my head, I don't think anything's different to what we do now in terms of, you just said, your board said, this is new. Well, no, we've been doing this forever. We've been trying to tell you. I like the term digital trust because I don't think anybody anywhere in our business is good. If you went to them and go, oh, right, so no one can trust us, right? That's not going to be a thing. So I think it's about adapting our measures that we already do around our vulnerability management. All the basic stuff, really, our threat management. What are we doing around it? All the stuff, all the compliance things. But I agree, I don't like them. They're tick boxy. and then we twist that story to show that we can be trusted. And I don't quite know, I think each organisation would have a different story as to how they can be trusted, as to whether they're looking after their data in a cloud environment or in a non-cloud environment, if they're heavily regulated. There are different stories for each organisation, but I think it is upon us to start thinking about those stories and how can we within our own organisations measure that and show that we can be trusted, so that our boards don't have to go, oh, don't trust us, because frankly, we don't look after your data, which is what we're saying if we have no digital trust. So we need that story.
Very quickly, because we're at the time. You're correct, there is a new profession creating, that's digital safety and trust teams, which businesses are seriously looking at, especially if you're more into the social media side of customers and influencing. So it is the next thing. And there's also a framework, I don't know if you're all aware of it, the environmental and social governance, which is taking hold at a board level. And again, that takes that whole kind of privacy and security and ethics and sustainability and having a framework and a strategy that the company works to and has to report to. So I think in the future, there's going to be a lot more around these types of frameworks. And that's especially if you're an influencer or a social company that's, like Instagram and things like that. So,
yeah, I think it's a fascinating question and a great way to end, I think, as well. And everybody's going to be here during the break. I think we've got 15 minutes in the break, or a little bit longer than that. So by all means, let's carry on this conversation in the break. So just as we end, what's the one takeaway that you perhaps have from here? I mean, the one that I really liked was that ecosystem thinking, Sarah, that you had, and because I think it makes us think more broadly, and perhaps expands on some of that. So, Dan, maybe what's the one thing that you would have?
Guess the term stewardship, because it's not just one person's responsibility; it's a collective, company-wide effort almost a bit.
Yeah, Sarah.
I think I'm now going to use the term digital trust because I quite like it.
Mine is relationship. You've got to have a relationship. That's a relationship with your peers, with your management team, and more importantly, with your customers.